So, as many of you know, the 5th iteration of the squad's Infantry Combat Overhaul has just dropped. It has a pretty comprehensible list of bug fixes and changes, and it has also added in 2 factions to be tested, the US Marine Corps and the Middle Eastern Alliance. And it's completely broken. I'd love to show you guys some proper in-game footage, but right now there is a bug plaguing the playtest that basically crashes your game if you get shot and give up. 10 seconds later, you are greeted with this message. So until this gets hot fixed, what I'm going to do is give you a quick preview of how the Marines and Middle Eastern Alliance weapons and optics look and handle like. In fact, I've only now just been notified that this weekend's playtests have been, in fact, cancelled. What I will say though is, all weapon tuning is subject to change and is not finalised. And I'm glad they said this because I was already worried about MEA, and this playtest justified me being worried. And that's where we will start, with the Middle Eastern Alliance. From what I can see, there have been no changes or adaptations to the roles or weapons. It is as it is within Vanilla Squad. Now, I fully expected these guns to have quite the kick, being that they are chambered in 7.62 by 51, and that they do. If you take your time with them, it's not too bad, but I can see this being a monumental disadvantage for them in close range fight and close quarter situations, simply because you cannot get a follow-up shot out anywhere near as fast. So I'd like to think that these guns will be a one-shot and drop. The G3 irons and red dot are fairly slow to ADS, but I'd kind of expect that given how big that they are. The iron sight's biggest issue comes when you adjust the range above 100 meters, because not only do you have to look through this tiny hole, but for now, some reason has been shrouded with blur, but it does have this over-barrel type aiming mechanic, similar to 6 Days in Fallujah and the AK-12 clear sight mechanic for shooting and moving. Not gonna lie, I kinda like this. Now the G3 with the Z point red dot is a really nice gun to run. Again, you have to be patient with your shots, but its biggest issue with this kit is the red dot is so washed out, it is incredibly difficult to see. The G3 with the ZF1 is a 4x scope and does have a nice weathered effect on it and a tiny bit of a dark tint. It is wobbly when you initially ADS, but it soon steadies out. Again, you have to be patient with your follow-up shots, but I can feel, given how wobbly it already is, during any form of suppression, you will be completely useless. And to top it off, full auto is a complete no-go. Quickly want to mention though, that the Browning pistol is an absolute masterpiece. It is super quick and snappy for its ADS time, and with a nice rate of fire to boot. And don't forget, this is the only rangeable pistol within the game. The HK51 for crewmen and pilots is listed as having its handling down as work in progress in the patch notes, and I can see why. It's atrocious. It's like the gun is trying to escape to its own dimension when firing. It was already bad in Vanilla Squad, and now it's just unusable. It does seem to have a similar clear sight point fire mechanic we saw with the G3 and AK-12, which is a redeemable characteristic to this weapon, but honestly, I would prefer if this was just put in the bin and replaced with an MP5. The HK51 with the red dot sight is nicer to use, and the weapon handling when moving feels much tighter than any other weapon in Squad, especially when sort of moving left and right, but it's still garbage. The G3A3 with the drum mag and iron sight is another cause for concern. It's like someone shoved the Rhodesian holdback device on the end of this, as it just nosedives the moment you pull the trigger, making it impossible to see what you are shooting at. For those wondering what a holdback device is, have a quick look on YouTube. The AK guy did a great video on the Rhodesian FAL, which also covers the holdback device. It's a good watch. However, when you use the version that has the ZF optic on it, it's an absolute different kettle of fish. This feels much more in line with other factions' automatic rifle kits, and you can see what you're doing. Rounds do deviate when firing longer than a short burst, and the optic fogs up when you go ham. So it's crazy that you have 2 identical rifles behaving completely different. The Marksman G3 SG is another nice bit of kit to use. The optic is only a 6x, but it is clean and clear, even without the bipod being deployed. It does rock about quite a bit. A lot of this is down to the balancing factor of these weapons using a larger caliber than other factions. And now for the main event, the MG3 and the RPG-29. The MG3 is simply stunning. The optic is super clear to see, and when short burst firing, this weapon is seriously a lot of fun to use. Prolonged firing does give you a lot more spread, and for some reason the gun does try to rotate. But this is going to be a very nasty bit of kit to be on the other end of. Don't attempt to point or shoulder fire it though, as it will take you for a ride. And finally, the RPG-29 is another fantastic bit of kit to use. Granted, it has a fairly long reload time. It is, however, super quick to ADS, maybe a tad too fast, and fairly quick to steady. Again, maybe a little bit too quick. But as far as heavy AT kits go, this one will be a great one to use. So overall, the Middle Eastern Alliance is going to be a lot more difficult to use than in the current state of squad. I can see it being a big turnoff for a lot of players, especially for those who are newer, and it now becoming an even more unloved faction to how it already is. Granted, there are some diamonds in the rough here and there with the MG3 and RPG-29 for example, but on the whole it's just a very difficult faction to use unless it's going to be on maps like Talil where you have a longer range engagements. But when you look at MEA, most of the time they are on smaller, more close quarters orientated maps like Mutaha and Fallujah. But furthermore, MEA above all other factions has been in desperate need of a full faction overhaul in Vanilla Squad. It's just a shame that this couldn't have been the time to implement that. I just hope these G3s are one-tap wonders and suppress the enemy much more than a regular rifle. Moving on to the Marines, and they do perform how you'd expect. The first thing I noticed, however, was on the Ironsight M16 and M27, it uses the same overstock quick-sighted mechanics as the Iron G3s. And again, I like where this is going because it is a fantastic close quarter battle mechanic to have. Now the M16 with the ACOG and vertical grip is simply sublime. This weapon combination actually feels genuinely solid, and finally doesn't feel like you have noodle arms. But even still, the basic M16 with the ACOG feels incredibly tight. A huge improvement on how it is on the US Army's M4s. The M9 pistol, however, has a monumentally slow ADS speed. It feels like it's made of cast iron, but like a man in his early 40s, once it's up, it stays up and reliable until you empty its load. The M27 IAR paired with the SDO optic is one of my all-time favourite kits in Vanilla Squad. Here, however, it's undergone quite a change. The sight picture is much narrower and feels a bit more clunky, and a bit harder to read due to being smaller. That being said though, it is an incredibly solid platform to use in both semi-auto and full. The M249 uses the exact same optic and seems to follow the same traits. It's great at throwing rounds down range, you can really see where you're shooting, and fogs up when you go ham. You really can feel its weight though when you do try to shoulder fire this. The M38 DMR is just as solid to use as the M110 that the US Army gets. It can be flipped between a 6x and an 8x, which is nice, but like the M110, it fairly assaults your face when you fire it, especially quickly. The 240G is paired with the MGO optic, which is a 6x, and if you can get around the narrow field of view, this is another fantastic machine gunner kit to run. And finally, the SMAW. It is quite slow to ADS, but very steady to operate and fire. A nice clear sight picture, and those spotting round traces seem to be a lot larger to the eye now. Arguably, I'd say that the Marines are now much more fun to play than the US Army. However, I haven't had a chance to try the US Army out as the playtests have all been cancelled. That also means I haven't been able to use these two factions in a full live game. What I will add about Playtest 5 is it feels like I have had a significant performance hit. I've dropped FPS notably, but not only that, the 70 FPS feels more like 20, and keep in mind I'm on a 4070 Ti, I'd hate to think what it's like on a lower card. And whilst talking about things like this, I've also noticed that the Ironsight M16 is massively bugged. It feels like it's been ranged to 400 meters at default. So in all, I'm kinda glad that OWI made the right call to cancel this playtest, because it would just turn so many people off. Like I said guys, I've not had a chance to use either of these factions properly, nor test out the changes for the Canadian Armed Forces, US Army or Russian factions. I have spied a few weapon tweaks here and there, which is making things feel much tighter on the whole, so the bigger picture is a positive. But until the next playtests, which I'm guessing will either be next weekend or the weekend after, that's all I really have to update you on the Infantry Combat Overhaul. You can still download the update and play with them on Jensen's range, which is worth a go, and I highly recommend that you do this. But for now, this is all I have for you. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more squad guides, gameplay and updates. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next video.